Today we're going to be going over the 9 generations in competitive Pokemon. I'm going to be ranking them worst to best. At the moment, I have them all in D tier, but I'm going to rank them one by one in sequential order. I'll be starting with Generation 1 and ending with Generation 9. I'll be ranking them on factors of how good each generation is competitively, as well as my own bias of which generations I think are more fun than others. But I will be backing that up with Pokemon in the metagame, or things that I deem to make the metagame good or to make the metagame bad, or things that are holding it back from being in a higher placement than I place it, or things that make it placed where it is, whether it be higher, whether it be low. So we're going to be starting off the list right here with Generation 1. I will be ranking Generation 1 in the C tier. I won't be ranking it in I won't be ranking it in the D tier, which is the worst, but I'll rank it slightly above the worst. Generation 1 definitely had a lot of things wrong with it. There's a lot of weird quirks in Generation 1, such as in Generation 1, Pokemon, crit hits are based on speed, so faster Pokemon have higher chances to crit. Another thing in Generation 1 is that Hyper Beam, if it one-shots a Pokemon, does not have to recharge. Another thing with Generation 1 is Body Slam cannot paralyze normal-type Pokemon, which is very interesting. And Generation 1's main issues holding it back from being a higher tier is just the fact that it's a very centralized metagame with Tauros, Snorlax, Chansey on almost every single team. And on top of being a very centralized metagame, some of the issues in Gen 1 is if you're frozen, you're basically dead because it's almost impossible to unthaw in Generation 1. Sleep is very annoying in Generation 1 because the turn you wake up, you're not able to act on that turn. So there's a lot of issues in Generation 1, as well as Wrap being very annoying because you can kind of get trapped and flinched almost indefinitely, which is quite frustrating. But even though a lot of those things may seem to be holding Generation 1 back, I think that you have to give credit where credit is due. With Generation 1 being the first generation, so they were working out a lot of those quirks. And as well as Generation 1 just being a fun generation to play. And if you're new to competitive Pokemon, Generation 1 is kind of easy to ease into with the fact that there's not a lot of Pokemon in OU, so it's a very centralized metagame that you can play. And there's also perks to it, like there's no hazards in Generation 1, so that's one last thing you have to deal with. And just it being that classic gameplay and it being the first of its kind, it's hard to put it in D tier as the worst generation of competitive Pokemon. Next up, we have Generation 2, which I'm going to put in A rank. I really love Generation 2, and I played a lot on this channel. I think that Generation 2 is really underrated as a metagame, and even though Snorlax is practically on every single team, I think Generation 2 is a very balanced metagame. There's only one layer of spikes that can go up, and Stealth Rocks don't exist yet. Excuse me, so I really like the Hazard game in Generation 1. I don't think a lot of Pokemon are overly threatening in Generation 1. It's very balanced. And even though Generation 1, just like Generation 2, is very centralized, it got rid of a lot of the problems that were faced in Gen 1. In Generation 1, Psychics and Normal types were very overpowered. In Generation 2, now there's Dark types to counter Psychics, and there's Steel types which resist Normal, so things like Steelix being very prominent, especially with how popular Snorlax is. And obviously Gen 2 still has the issues that there's not a lot of good fighting stabs, so Snorlax is running very rampant around the tier. But I think Generation 2 just takes Generation 1 and just makes it slightly better. And that's why I put it all the way up to A rank. And you may think, if it makes Gen 1 slightly better, why wouldn't it go from C to B? But this is just my personal preference, because if you've been a long time viewer of this channel, you know that I play a lot of Generation 2. And I just really enjoy the metagame. I think it has really good breakers, such as Marowak. Machamp having Cross Chop makes Machamp really good because it can hit Pokemon like Tyranitar and Snorlax really hard. I love that in Generation 2 it's very simple. All Pokemon have maxed out IVs, so mixed attackers like Nidoking are good, and mixed attackers such as Executor with Explosion are really good because he can utilize that Explosion with that 90 attack stat, as well as his stab moves of Giga Drain and Psychic with that 125 special attack stat. And yeah, I'm just scrolling through some teams here so you can kind of look at what some of the teams look like. There's Spikeless Offense, Stall, and then just Offense. And Generation 2 is hated because of Stall. A lot of people say it's consider it like the Stall generation. But one thing I'll say is, if you watch on my channel, I win a lot of times playing Offense in Generation 2 to prove that it works. And as time goes on, offense is used a lot more than so on Generation 2. And for people who complain about slow on Generation 2, I just explained that in later generations with abilities and heavy-duty boots, such as Generation 8, where you can have Pokemon like Slowbro and Tornadus with heavy-duty boots and Regenerator, where they can keep pivoting in and healing almost indefinitely. I've definitely had games in Gen 8 go a lot longer than games in Gen 2, that's for sure. Not that Gen 8 is necessarily bad, and we'll get to that eventually, but I'd say that the hate for Gen 2 is overstated, and the hype for Gen 2 is not stated enough. Next up, and not shockingly, is Generation 3, which is going in S rank. ADV is the most played generation in competitive Pokemon next to the current Gen OU, which is Gen 9. The current Gen OU is always the most played because it's the most current, so that makes sense. But Generation 3 is always, for the most part, in a close second because Generation 3 is seen as the most balanced metagame and just piggybacks off the previous generations and makes it even better iteration. You have balanced teams, offense teams, stall teams, all that kind of stuff. But some of the main Pokemon in Generation 1 you're going to come across is a lot of times what's considered the big five of Skarmory, Blissey, Tyranitar, Swampert, and Gengar. Gengar is really good for spin blocking. Swampert's one of the best Pokemon in the tier because it can resist Sandstorm and be able to chip heal up. Blissey is extremely good in Generation 3, even though it wasn't as good in Generation 2 because of the IV systems to where now it's an amazing special wall and things can't break through it as well, because it used to be that things would have more physical offense because all their offensive stats would be maxed out. This and that and the other thing, but in Generation 3, Blissey's even better. Some of the problems I have in Generation 3 and that a lot of people probably brought up is just the fact that Skarmory is everywhere and on almost every team. And it's really hard to deal with Skarmory because Magneton, as well as it seems like a perfect trapper to Skarmory, you can't really fit Magneton on every team because it doesn't do much outside of trap Skarmory. And Skarmory, a lot of times, because it doesn't get damaged by Sandstorm and has Protect, can chip heal with leftovers and keep getting spikes up over and over again, as well as the fact that it can phase people out with Roar. Skarmory was already a great Pokemon in Generation 2 without spikes, so getting spikes made it a very top tier threat in Generation 3. But Generation 3, I can't say enough about it on the positive end, though. It's a very balanced tier. You can make almost any type of archetype work. It doesn't feel like there's too much offense, balance, stall, or any of those archetypes. None of them seem to shine through more than others. And even hyper offense has seen some spotlight a lot of times with Swords Dance Pass with Celebi to Aerodactyl, because Aerodactyl is the fastest Pokemon in the tier, so it can break through teams. Claydol's a great rapid spinner because of the fact that it has Psychic to hit rapid spin blockers such as Gengar. And yeah, Generation 3 is a great tier, and it's seen as one of the most balanced and fair metagames, and a lot of Pokemon players who have played for a long time consider Gen 3 the most balanced tier, and it's a tier people come back to time and time again when they want to play a tier that feels the most fair, and like they're not going to get lucked or teased through because of a lot of times just the luck that comes with competitive Pokemon. So next up on the list, we have Generation 4, which is staying in the D tier. Generation 4 is my least favorite generation to play. I think because the fact that Generations 1 to 4 have no team preview, though in Generation 1 to 3, I think no team preview is good because the metagames are pretty centralized, and a lot of times with team structures, it's pretty easy to guess what that last one or two Pokemon are going to be, or at least close to it. But because Generation 4 released so many more new Pokemon, it's really hard to tell what someone's team's going to be. And because Generation 4 released a lot of new items such as the Choice Scarf, the Choice Specs, and a lot of new berries like Resist Berries, it makes the amount of factors in the game being really hard to predict, especially with no team preview. And what makes this so difficult is that because there's so many more new Pokemon added and so many Pokemon that can have multiple different items, when in Generations 1, 2, and 3, well, not Generations 1, 2, and 3, there's no items in Gen 1, but in Generations 2 and 3, where almost every single Pokemon used leftovers besides a select few Pokemon such as Marowak or Pokemon in Generation 3 that have Choice Band, in Generation 4, there's so many new items that the item the Pokemon have can determine the game a lot of times, whether that be a choice scarf that's going to outspeed you, or a choice band with more damage, or choice specs. It's really hard to be able to predict those kind of things. And in Generation 4, because there's so many more Pokemon, if I were to make the game today, I would have had there be team preview like Generation 5, because the fact there's so many new items, and also the fact that Stealth rocks into the mix. Generation 4 is an offensive smash mouth of a tier. One of the other issues I have with Generation 4 is just Jirachi, who Jirachi in Generation 4 ends up getting Iron Head and Zen Headbutt, which with Serene Grace have a 60% chance to flinch a Pokemon, which in and of itself is extremely annoying. But if your opponent gets really lucky and has a Choice Scarf to outspeed, they can Iron Head flinch through double resist like Heatran, or I've even seen people Iron Head flinch into a resisted, intimidated Gyarados. So just the ridiculousness of Jirachi, and the fact that it's really hard to make meaningful predictions in a game that's supposed to be about competitive game. I think Gen 4 adds too much luck into the mix, especially if we even want to get into the Gyarados side of things with the 30% chance to flinch and setting up, and Thunder Wave and substitute sets and all those things. Just someone who's played Gen 4, I've never particularly liked it. I've played it once or twice on this channel, and as the channel history goes on, I might play it more, but it's definitely not my generation. One of the things that they have done that I will say was a good change was the fact that they banned Machamp, who with no guard and Dynamic Punch was extremely annoying with a confused chance, on top of the whole paralysis spam of the tier. So that was a great ban. And them banning Sleep was a very good change, because Breloom with Poison Heal and substitute sets, and with Technician, Bullet Punch, and Mach Punch is still an amazing Pokemon, but when you added Sport to the mix, it was really hard to combat Breloom, because the amount of switch-ins to Breloom was very low, and the switch-ins you did have would get put to sleep, which a lot of times if your resist to Breloom is your Dragon type, but your Dragon type's your Wind condition, then it puts you in a position where you either switch in your Wind condition and lose the game because it's now asleep, or you just have something stay in that's weak to Breloom and die, which is a very terrible way to play the game. And in Generation 4, where there wasn't many counters to that kind of play, it was really good that they banned it. Also, Latias is definitely one of the best Pokemon in the tier. As you can see, it's on almost every team. Not going to go into the viability rankings here, because I don't want this video to be hours long, because if I went into everything about every tier, we'd be here all day. But Latias is one of the best Pokemon in the tier, as well as Tyranitar is the number one in the tier. Tyranitar in Generation 4 with a physical special split now has Crunch and Pursuit, which now hit physical instead of special. So he's hitting with that 134 physical attack instead of that 95 special attack. So he's really good. And here's some stall teams using Hippowdon is a sand setter that's a lot more defensive than Tyranitar, but less threatening offensively. You have Skarmy, still a great Pokemon, and now can actually utilize Sturdy as almost a focus dash, which is a great change from Sturdy's only being able to work with OHKO moves, which are banned. So yeah, this is the Gen 4 tier. I'm not going to go too much into it, because not only do I not play it a lot, but I also just really don't like the tier. That's why I put it so low. Next up, Gen 5, I'd put in the middle. So we're going to go to Generation 5 next. Generation 5 has had so many ups and downs and so many bans that I don't even know where to start, but if you play competitive Pokemon, then you'll know that Generation 5 is considered the weather generation, because in Generations 3 and 4, you have Tyranitar to set the sand and overused. But besides the rare cases with a Pokemon, a water type setting up with Rain Dance, such as Ludicolo or Kingdra, or the occasional Chlorophyll Pokemon setting up with Sunny Day, you don't exactly see other forms of weather very much. But in Generation 5, Politoed came to the mix, being able to set rain. In setting rain, this was before Generation 6, where it only lasts for 5 turns, so it's permanent just like sand. And rain is very interesting in Generation 5, because you have Pokemon with Rain Dish, such as Tentacruel, who hadn't really seen the limelight since Generation 2 as a Rapid Spinner. Now they're really good, because they can heal with Rain Dish as well as Leftovers and use Protect and Rapid Spin. And other Pokemon such as Thundurus Therian, which Generation 5 is the only generation in which Zapdos fell from OU, because Thunderous Therian can hit harder with a higher special attack, and Thunders that don't miss in rain, as well as the fact it has Volt Absorb, where it can heal on electric moves that are going to be utilized against a rain team. Hyper Offense is also popular in Generation 5, and one of the things I do like about Generation 5 is the fact of what they call Drag Mag teams, or just Dragon Spam, where people will put Pokemon like Hero Black, Garchomp, and Dragonite all on the same team, which this seems like a dumb team structure to stack a bunch of dragons, but you have to know that in Generation 5, there was no fairy types yet, and Draco Meteor hit harder than it does today, so stacking a bunch of dragons on the same team was actually a clear shot at victory a lot of the times, as with today that it'd be seen as very idiotic because of the fact that you can just pivot in fairy types to be immune to that. Generation 5 I put in the middle, mainly because of just the fun aspect. Generation 5 is definitely not the most balanced here, especially with Pokemon like Alakazam with Magic Guard being able to resist incoming hazards and sand, and Pokemon like Reuniclus being pretty ridiculous with high special attack and bulk to be able to go through, and the fact of just Scald everywhere, which has a 30% chance to burn, and nothing comes in on it for free, and with the rain up, it's even more ridiculous. Gen 5 is definitely by no means a balanced tier, but I just rated it in the middle, more on the fun aspect of things, because it's the only generation where there's both permanent rain, permanent hail with Abomasnow, permanent sun. There's basically a permanent version of everything in Gen 5, when the tiers before it, the only permanent weather setting ability, at least in OU and not Ubers, was sand, and after, weather setting abilities were nerfed to 5 turns, so it's a very unique game in competitive Pokemon history, so I think it at least deserves the middle spot. Next up on the list, we're going to go Gen 6. I'm going to put Gen 6 in B tier, and to be honest, Gen 6 is not a generation that I play all too much, because as you'll come to find out, one of the later generations I like a lot more than Gen 6. Gen 6 is a very balanced tier. I'd say it's a more balanced version of Gen 5, as with weather now only lasting those 5 turns, as previously mentioned. It's a pretty offensive tier. As you see, the top things up here is Hyper Offense, Offense, and Bulky Offense, as this is the tier that added Megas to the mix. Mega Evolution, though, in Generation 6 compared to Generation 7, took a turn to introduce, and not to mention there was a lot less Megas in Gen 6 than there was in Gen 7. So for something like Mega Swampert, for example, not being as good in Generation 6, because it would not get that Swift Swim ability immediately, it would get it the following turn. Also, Pokemon such as Mega Metagross, which are banned in Gen 7 for being so overpowered, were not banned in Gen 6 because of the fact that they'd have to be Metagross for a turn before they'd get that amazing ability and those amazing stats. So I'm just going to click off that here. So as you can see, this tier with Pokemon that are pretty popular. Not Executor. Just give me a second. Excadrill. I said Executor, it's Excadrill. Excadrill is super popular in Generation 6, but one of the best rapid spinners. As you see, it's on so many teams. Excadrill is amazing, just like it is in Gen 5. Tornadus Therian's amazing. The regenerative ability, being able to pivot in and out and be able to heal back up. For the Megas, Mega Metagross was amazing in this tier. Mega Alakazam, super high special attack, amazing in this tier. Mega Lopunny, Mega Latias. As you can see, those are a lot of the Megas that are used, and the Megas that are considered the best in the tier. Another Pokemon used a lot is Superior, because Superior has the contrary ability to where if you use Leaf Storm, it boosts your special attack by 2 instead of lowering it by 2. You also have Glare, which is a 100% accurate paralysis move, which is just amazing. Mega Tyranitar is even used on this team. This is a team I saw covered by BKC at one point. It's a very good balanced team with Tyranitar. So yeah, that's Generation 6. I don't have a ton to say about it just because I don't play it all too much, but I still think it's a solid tier nonetheless. So now I'm going to go back to the tier list here. Next up, Generation 7. This is why I didn't cover Gen 6 that much, because I think Gen 7 is a better version of Gen 6. I think a lot of the Pokemon they added made the game more fun. I really like Z-moves, and I also like Megas being instant instead of taking a turn to set in. Even though that did get some Megas banned that were allowed in Gen 6, I think it was a worthy change that made the game better in my opinion. And I've also just played Gen 7 the most, and I think Gen 7 is my favorite tier. plain and simple. So Generation 7 added a lot to the game with Mega Evolutions taking one turn, as previously mentioned. Also, I really like I know a lot of people don't like the Ultra Beast, but I really do. I think Magearna, Kartana, and a lot of those other Pokemon are very interesting and cool. I really like that they get a boost each time they take a Pokemon out, similar to Moxie. I also like some of the interesting sets people do where they nerf Kartana's attacks, that when he gets a kill, it'll boost his speed, so that he gets a boosted speed each time he takes a Pokemon out. I really like the versatility of Pokemon like Magearna, being able to use an Assault Vest to boost its special defense, being able to use Shift Gear to boost its speed, Trick Room to go first and be slow. The versatility I really like. I also like how so many Megas are used in Generation 7 because of the fact that they're instant and don't take an extra turn. So even in just offense, you see Mega Mawile, Mega Metachan, Mega Scizor, Mega Lopunny, Mega Gyarados, Mega Pinsir. You see all these Pokemon being able to be used, which I think that makes the game so much better because in Gen 6 you see like the same 4 Megas. In Gen 7 you see so many different Megas being utilized. Even in my channel I utilized Mega Bombasino to very good heights using a Trick Room team. Some of the issues people do share about Gen 7, which I do think is fair, is that hyper offense is very prominent, because if you have a tier with Megas that are instantaneous, Z moves, which are basically just a one-time nuke that you can utilize, and also these Ultra Beasts, which are in some sense just better legendaries for the most part, at least some of them, such as Magearna and Kartana, you definitely have a tier that leans more towards offense than defense. But the one thing I will subject to say against that is the fact that as far as stall is concerned, you do have Mega Sableye, which is incredible. I don't know if it shows stall in here. We'll check. Well, this says balance and fats, so here's some stally teams. They say balance, but they're more stally. But yeah, if you've played the tier, you definitely know you've come across Mega Sableye, who's unbanned and can Magic Guard hazards and be extremely defensive. And even though the tier is very offensive, you definitely have defensive Megas that do push back on offense. But if you like playing offense, then Gen 7 is definitely your tier. I also really like the Psychic Spam teams with Tapu Koko and Alakazam. I've always found them really fun. Also, another interesting type of archetype is Rain. I don't know if what you've heard about Generation 7, but one of the criticisms is that Rain's pretty broken because of the fact that Ash Greninja has such high speed and special attack, and with priority water shurikens, it's very frustrating to handle. Even Manaphy with the Z move and Tail Glow, which can boost his special attack 2.5 stages instead of Nasty Plot, which boosts it 2 stages, and Damp Rock making Rain last longer. Ferrothorn, who's already good, being able to not get hit 4 times super effectively by fire moves because of Rain, and the fact that in Gen 7, Swampert is instantaneous, so you get to hit hard with his high attack stats, as well as set hazards for your team. So Gen 7 definitely does have its issues. I'd say the main 2 issues are it's a little too offensive, and Rain is definitely more broken, even more broken, I'd say, than Generation 5, because there's more pushback in Generation 5. But other than that, I think Generation 7 is the best generation, or at least considered on par with Generation 3. Next up, we have Gen 8. Gen 8, I'm also going to put in the B tier. Generation 8 has the opposite issue as Generation 7, in the fact that I think that there is too much stall compared to Generation 7, where I think it's a little too offensive. A lot of people complain that Generation 2 has too much stall, but I think Generation 8 has way more stall because of the fact you have heavy-duty boots, you have Pokemon like Toxapex that can now keep recover spamming and utilizing Regenerator to last forever. You have Pokemon like Tornadus Therian, which one of the good ways to counter Tornadus Therian was with Stealth Rock, but now it can come in, recover off Stealth Rock because it has Regenerator and has heavy-duty boots, can pivot out, can knock off items, teleport where Pokemon can teleport out, such as Slowbro. I think Generation 8 is a good generation, and that's why I rated it more in the in-between than low, but it definitely has an issue with bulk and the fact that Regenerator can be extremely annoying, and I've even had games where my last Pokemon left is something like Tornadus and Slowbro, where even though my opponent might have 4 or 5 Pokemon, I can just switch repeatedly, almost indefinitely, if they don't have knockoff because of Regenerator. And I've even had issues where if my offensive Pokemon die or I have one of my win conditions die, my opponent just pivots in something like Toxapex and Tornadus indefinitely until I either rage quit or lose the game after hundreds of turns, because it's almost impossible to break through. And it's not impossible to break through because Pokemon like Weavile are so popular for a reason, and on a lot of these teams you see here, because of the fact that Dark hits Slowbro super effectively and Ice hits Tornado super effectively. But the reason something like Weavile rose to prominence in this tier is not because Weavile is some amazing mon, but because it can break through these defensive threats that plague the tier. Last but not least, Generation 9, I'm going to rank in C tier. I don't think it's the worst generation, but I think it has a lot of issues, so we're going to go into that quick. So in Generation 9, the main issue I have is that this is the generation where you really feel the power creep more than any other generation, which makes sense because it's the most modern one. But just to show how crazy it is, something like Deoxys Speed, which would be in Ubers and every other generation prior, is now in OU, and it doesn't even seem like the most threatening thing there. Zamazenta is down in OU now. You have Darkrai down in OU now. Need I go further? A lot of these mons that were considered ubiquitously Ubers are now in overused. So Gen 9 almost feels more like an Ubers tier than it does an OU tier at this point. They nerfed Landorus, but Landorus is still pretty decent. Great Tusk is just amazing all around because it has defensive bulk, decent speed, and good offenses, and knockoff, and headlong rush, which is a close combat, but a ground version. Goldango is able to hazard block like no other, because unlike normal ghost types, you can't use Defog on it because it has Good as Gold, which blocks any status conditions, including trying to paralyze it or burn it. So I think one of the main issues in Generation 9 isn't exactly offense or defense, but it's just hazard stack. Because in this generation, it's really easy to get Spikes and Stealth Rocks up and keep them up with Goldango. And you may be thinking, oh, well, it doesn't want to come in on Great Tusk because Great Tusk can use knockoff on it or use Headlong Rush, which is true, but you can negate this with tearing and changing your type, as well as having air balloons that you can come in for free on the ground move or the normal move with Rapid Spin or Headlong Rush. So I think Gen 9 definitely has its issues, and one of the main ones I just discussed is power creep. I also think, I'm just going to search this up quick, because I haven't played the tier in a hot minute, so I'm just checking to make sure this Pokemon I think is not banned isn't banned, because I don't want to say this Pokemon's banned and then people watch the video and then say, oh, he's not banned. So I'm just going to hit add Pokemon. I'm just going to go water type. Whoops. I'm just going to go, yeah, Ogerpon Wellspring is unbanned. So Ogerpon Wellspring is one of my main issues with it. And when they decided not to ban it was when I actually left the game because and started playing older tiers, is because I think it's just so annoying. Ogerpon's Ivy Cudgel, which is 100 damage, high crit hit chance, water move, which unlike Crawdon's water move of similar status, is unable to miss. U-turn and knockoff for pivoting and getting rid of items. It also has Synthesis to heal, Spikes to set up hazards, Encore to keep you utilizing the same move over and over again, or Taunt to keep you from healing. I just think Ogerpon Wellspring is really overpowered. Also, the fact that it has Power Whip for hard-hitting Grass Stab, Trailblaze to boost its speed, Play Rough to hit Dragon type, Substitute. I think it was one of those Pokemon I'd consider a jack of all trades and a master of all. Its stats of 120 attack and 110 speed, and Water Absorbs, so you can't hit it with water moves, and it heals if it's hit with water moves, so you can utilize that with Pokemon that don't want to get hit with water moves. I just think that if you play Generation 9, you definitely know what I'm talking about, and know that even though Generation 9 is not the worst generation, it definitely has its issues and overpowered mons that probably need to be banned. I mean, another Pokemon, King Gambit, who has an insanely high attack stat and can utilize Sucker Punch to basically come back and win games from behind. I've seen many times people come back with King Gambit and basically sweep teams because the more of your own Pokemon are dead, the more damage it does with its ability, which basically means that you can be beating your opponent down to his last mon and only making his last mon stronger, which is very infuriating, especially if you're on the other side of that in those mind games with Sucker Punch. So Generation 9, I do think, is not the most unbalanced tier, even though it is very much to the point where a lot of Ubers got brought down, and it's definitely the most power crept generation. I don't think it's as broken as the generation as Generation 5 as far as the Weather Wars stuff was concerned, but I definitely think Generation 9 with a couple more bands and tweaks could be definitely a lot higher on our list, but for now, its state it's in currently, I'd say it is C tier. So that is all I have for you, and let me know in the comments what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, what generations you'd put higher, and what generations you'd put lower, and that's all I have for you.